They called me the help at my own engagement dinner, laughed when I said I was marrying their son. His mother threw my grandmother's ring in the trash. But what they didn't know, I wasn't just some girl from nowhere. I was about to become the one person who could destroy everything they'd built. And I did. If you love stories about karma serving justice on a silver platter, you're in the right place. Hit that like button right now, subscribe, and buckle up. Because this story gets wild. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. My name is Sienna, and I need you to understand something right from the start. I'm not the kind of woman who goes looking for trouble. I'm a corporate attorney. I wear tailored suits, I argue cases in front of judges, and I've built my career on facts, logic, and an ironclad work ethic. I don't do drama, I don't play games, but sometimes, life has a way of dealing you a hand you never asked for, and you have to decide whether you're going to fold or go all in. It started on a Thursday evening in September at a charity fundraiser for children's literacy. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My colleague had bailed last minute, and I took her ticket because, honestly, I had nothing better to do. The venue was one of those historic mansions downtown, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, filled with the kind of people who write five-figure checks without blinking. I was nursing a glass of champagne, trying to look interested in a conversation about yacht maintenance, when I saw him. Dominic Whitmore. Tall, warm brown eyes, a smile that could disarm an entire courtroom. He wasn't like the others in that room. There was something genuine about him, something kind. When he walked up to me, he didn't ask what I did for a living, or try to impress me with his connections. He asked if I'd actually read the book we were fundraising for, and when I said yes, we spent the next 2 hours debating children's literature and completely ignoring everyone else at the gala. 6 months later, he proposed to me in my apartment on a random Tuesday night. No flash mob, no restaurant full of strangers recording on their phones. Just him, me, a pizza we'd ordered, and a ring that took my breath away. It was an antique sapphire, surrounded by tiny diamonds, delicate and old-fashioned, and absolutely perfect. He told me it had been his grandmother's, that she'd given it to him years ago, and told him to save it for someone truly special. I said yes before he even finished asking. Here's the thing about Dominic that I didn't fully understand at the time. He was vague about his family, not in a suspicious way, but in a way that should have told me something was off. He'd mention his mother in passing, his father's business, his sister's wedding I wasn't invited to. When I asked to meet them, he'd change the subject or say they were traveling. After the proposal, I put my foot down. I wasn't about to marry someone whose family I'd never met, and I told him so. The look on his face when I insisted should have been my first real warning. It was fear, pure, genuine fear. He tried to prepare me with careful words. His family was traditional, he said. They took time to warm up to new people. They had certain expectations about who he'd marry. I remember laughing, actually laughing, and telling him I was a successful attorney with 2 degrees and a spotless reputation. What more could they want? He didn't answer that question directly, but he finally agreed to arrange a dinner, an engagement dinner at the family estate. He held my hand so tightly in the car on the way there that my fingers went numb, and he kept apologizing in advance for things I didn't yet understand. The Whitmore mansion sat on 5 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in the state. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. Old money, generations of it, built into every brick and rosebush. When we pulled up to the circular driveway, my stomach dropped. This wasn't the home of comfortable wealth. This was the kind of wealth that came with expectations, legacy, and a very specific idea of who belonged. We walked up to the front door together, Dominic's hand shaking in mine. Before we could knock, the door opened, and a woman in a black uniform looked at me with confusion. She glanced past me to Dominic, then back to me, then said the words, "I'll never forget. The service entrance is around back, miss. Follow the path to the kitchen." I stood there, frozen. Dominic went pale and stammered that I was his fiancée, that we were expected. The woman's eyes went wide, and she apologized profusely, but the damage was done. That was my welcome to the Whitmore family, mistaken for the help before I even crossed the threshold. Inside, the house was exactly what you'd expect. Priceless art on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than my car, and an air of superiority so thick you could choke on it. Dominic's mother, Vivian Whitmore, stood in the drawing room like a queen holding court. She was thin, elegant, and cold as winter marble. When Dominic introduced me, she extended 2 fingers for a handshake, the kind you'd give to something you were afraid might be contagious, and said, "Oh, you must be the girl Dominic mentioned." Not fiancé, not even guest, just the girl. His father, Harrison, barely looked up from his scotch. His sister, Clarissa, appeared in a cloud of expensive perfume and looked me up and down like I was a stain on the carpet. The interrogation started before we even sat down for dinner. Where was I from? What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? Each question had a subtext, a searching quality, like they were trying to find the exact reason I didn't belong. Dinner was worse. They seated me at the far end of the table, physically separated from Dominic by his entire family. Vivian dominated the conversation, talking about families I'd never heard of, vacations to places I'd never been, and making references to a world I wasn't part of. Every time I tried to contribute, she'd smile tightly and redirect. Clarissa was less subtle, asking if my family spoke proper English at home, and whether I'd ever been to Europe or just dreamed about it. Harrison discussed me in third person while I sat right there. "She seems articulate enough," he said to Dominic, as if I were a dog being evaluated for adoption. "Though I'm not sure she understands the responsibilities that come with the Whitmore name." I held my tongue through all of it. I smiled. I was polite. I was everything my grandmother raised me to be, even as rage built in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. And then came the moment that changed everything. Dominic, trying desperately to salvage the evening, announced our engagement officially. He took my hand and showed them the sapphire ring on my finger. I watched Vivian's face transform from condescending politeness to pure ice. She went completely still, staring at that ring like it was a viper coiled around my finger. "That ring," she said slowly, "belongs to Whitmore women. Real Whitmore women." The room went silent. I felt Dominic tense beside me, but he didn't speak. Vivian stood up, walked around the table, and extended her hand. "I'll take it back now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me? That ring is a family heirloom. It's not appropriate for someone like you to wear it. I'm sure Dominic can buy you something more suitable. Someone like me." The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. I looked at Dominic, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother she was out of line. But he just sat there, frozen, caught between the woman he claimed to love and the family he was terrified of. I stood up, my hand instinctively covering the ring. "This ring was given to me by the man I love. I'm not giving it back." What happened next, I still see in slow motion. Vivienne reached out, grabbed my hand, and physically yanked the ring off my finger. The metal scraped my skin. She held it up to the light for a moment, examining it like she was checking for damage, then walked to a decorative trash bin near the sideboard and dropped it in. The sound of that ring hitting the bottom of that trash can is something I'll hear for the rest of my life. I waited for Dominic to do something, anything, but he just sat there, white-faced and silent. That's when I knew love wasn't going to be enough. Not against this, not against them. I walked out without another word. I made it to the circular driveway before I started crying. Great heaving sobs that I couldn't control. Dominic came running after me. Apologies spilling from his mouth. Promises that he'd fix this, that he'd make it right. He went back inside and actually retrieved the ring from the trash, got down on one knee in the driveway, and re-proposed, with tears running down his face. He swore he'd stand up to them. He swore he'd choose me. We'd elope, he said. Cut them off completely. Build our own life without their approval, or their money, or their legacy hanging over us. I wanted to believe him so badly that I said yes, again. But here's what I didn't tell Dominic, what I didn't tell anyone. 3 weeks before that horrible dinner, I'd received a phone call that changed my life. A lawyer representing Byron Lancaster had tracked me down with news I never expected. Byron was my mother's older brother, my uncle, a venture capitalist, billionaire I'd only met once, at my mother's funeral when I was 8 years old. He was dying, and he wanted to see me. My mother had been estranged from her wealthy family when she married my father, a middle-class teacher they deemed unsuitable. She'd chosen love over money, and they'd cut her off. After she died when I was young, her family never reached out. I grew up comfortable but not wealthy, put myself through school, built my own life. I'd made peace with never being part of the Lancaster world. But Byron was dying of pancreatic cancer, and he was full of regrets. He wanted to reconcile. More than that, he wanted to make amends by naming me his sole heir. I met with him in his penthouse apartment, overlooking the city. He was thin, weak, hooked up to oxygen, but his mind was sharp. He apologized for the family's treatment of my mother, for abandoning me after her death. And then he showed me the papers. I was inheriting everything. The Lancaster fortune, $800 million, controlling shares in Lancaster Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. Property, assets, a legacy I never asked for. Here's the twist that made everything else possible. As I sat in Byron's lawyer's office, reviewing the portfolio, one name jumped out at me from the list of Lancaster Capital's major holdings: Whitmore Industries. The Whitmore family business, the source of all their wealth and pride, was heavily invested in and essentially controlled by Lancaster Capital, my family's firm. The people who'd just humiliated me, who'd called me unsuitable, who'd thrown my ring in the trash, they were dependent on money that was about to become mine. I didn't tell Dominic right away. I needed time to process, to plan, to decide what kind of person I was going to be. We eloped 2 weeks later in a simple courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses we pulled off the street. It was perfect and private and ours. His family wasn't invited. They sent a lawyer with papers, trying to get him to sign a post-nuptial agreement. Dominic ripped them up. For 6 months, I lived a double life. Loving wife by night, secret corporate titan by day. I learned everything about Whitmore Industries, their financials, their debts, their desperate need for continued investment from Lancaster Capital. They had no idea who I was. To them, I was just Sienna, the unsuitable black girl their son had stubbornly married. Byron died 4 months after our wedding. I gave the eulogy at his funeral, and that's when I stepped fully into my role as CEO of Lancaster Capital. The business world noticed. A young black woman taking control of a major investment firm was news. My face was in the financial papers, but the Whitmores didn't read those papers. They were too busy running their own company into the ground. Then came the emergency board meeting. Whitmore Industries was facing bankruptcy without new capital injection. They'd mismanaged funds, made bad investments, and were hemorrhaging money. Their only hope was Lancaster Capital, their primary investor. Harrison called the meeting himself, desperate to grovel for the funding that would save his company. I'll never forget walking into that boardroom. Dominic knew I was coming, but even he didn't know I'd decided to reveal everything in one devastating moment. I wore a black power suit, my hair pulled back, the sapphire ring on one hand, and a Lancaster family heirloom diamond on the other. I carried a leather portfolio and walked in flanked by my attorneys. The look on Vivian's face when she saw me was worth everything I'd endured. Harrison actually grabbed the table for support. Clarissa's mouth fell open. I took my seat at the head of the conference table, directly across from Harrison, and introduced myself formally. Good morning, I'm Sienna Lancaster Whitmore, CEO of Lancaster Capital. I believe you're here to discuss the future of Whitmore Industries. The silence was deafening. Vivian tried to speak, but nothing came out. Harrison's face had gone purple. I opened my portfolio and laid out the facts. Their company was failing. Lancaster Capital had the power to either save them or let them collapse. I had controlling interest in their survival. Then I presented my terms, a public apology to me, published in the business section of the major newspaper. Vivian would step down from all her social boards and charity positions. Harrison would relinquish the CEO position to Dominic, effective immediately. Clarissa would work directly under my supervision in the corporate restructuring. The entire family would attend mandatory diversity and inclusion training, and I would have veto power over all major company decisions going forward. Vivian finally found her voice. This is extortion. This is revenge. I smiled. No, Mrs. Whitmore. This is business. You can sign these agreements and save your family legacy, or I can liquidate our investment by end of business Friday, and you can explain to your country club friends why the Whitmore name is synonymous with bankruptcy. Your choice. They signed everything. The public apology happened at the annual charity gala, the same one where I'd met Dominic. Vivienne stood at the podium in front of everyone who mattered in her social world and read a statement I'd written. She apologized for her prejudice, her cruelty, and her failure to see my worth. She admitted her behavior had been rooted in racism and elitism. Every word was torture for her, and I watched from the front row, Dominic beside me, wearing both of my rings and a Lancaster family tiara I'd retrieved from storage. That was a year ago. Today, Whitmore Industries is thriving under Dominic's leadership and my strategic guidance. We've implemented diversity initiatives that have actually made the company stronger. Profits are up. The Whitmore name means something different now, something better. Vivian calls me daughter now, though the word still catches in her throat. Harrison asks my advice on business decisions. Clarissa actually became competent once she stopped spending all her energy on being cruel. And Dominic's grandmother, who I finally met after all this, told me she never liked Vivienne anyway and was thrilled someone finally put her in her place. But here's what nobody expected: the final twist in this whole story. 6 months ago, I discovered something while reviewing old Lancaster Capital files. Byron's original investment in Whitmore Industries hadn't been random. Decades ago, Harrison Whitmore had been engaged to my mother before she met my father. When she broke off the engagement to marry for love instead of money, Harrison had been humiliated. He married Vivian on the rebound and built his entire life trying to prove he was better than the woman who'd rejected him. My mother had died, never knowing that the Whitmores' hatred of me wasn't just racism and classism. It was Harrison's decades-old resentment of her choice, projected onto her daughter. I was the living reminder that my mother had chosen love and happiness over the Whitmore legacy, and I'd turned out successful anyway. When I confronted Harrison with this information privately, he broke down, confessed that he'd seen my mother and me from the first moment, and it had terrified him, admitted that their cruelty had been about his own failures, not mine. I could have used that information to destroy him completely, but I didn't, because I realized something important. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's taking everything they tried to use against you and turning it into your crown. Now, when I sit at the head of that conference table, when I make decisions that shape the Whitmore family's future, when Vivian has to ask my permission for company initiatives, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel power. Not the kind they had, built on exclusion and fear, but real power, earned through dignity, intelligence, and the patience to let karma do its work. They tried to make me feel small, unworthy, like I didn't belong. But the truth is, they never belonged in my world. I didn't just marry into their family. I didn't just save their company. I became their queen. And every single day, they have to remember that the woman they threw away a ring for now holds the keys to everything they value. That's how you turn humiliation into coronation. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with strategy, patience, and the quiet confidence that you were always exactly who you needed to be. And that's the story of how I went from being called the help at my own engagement dinner to becoming the most powerful person in the room. If this gave you chills, smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. And subscribe, because I've got more karma stories coming that'll blow your mind. Remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They might just own everything you love. See you in the next one.